Good afternoon. Did everyone get lunch today? Was it good? Very good. How many were not here yesterday? Raise your hand if you were not here yesterday. Okay, great. I just wanted to see, because I'll introduce Dr. Sandoval today again. So, we're glad that you have all come for this portion of our Health Expo to hear the mind-body connection. Dr. Sandoval will be our speaker, and he obtained his doctorate in medicine from Loma Linda University School of Medicine, and subsequently obtained his board certification in emergency medicine and lifestyle medicine. While a missionary physician in Trinidad and Tobago, God gave him a passion for health education. He became involved in radio and TV programming, development of health literature, and organizing health outreach around the island. At that time, he founded Health by the Book, a nonprofit organization promoting health and wellness across the island. Subsequently, he served as medical director and president of Uchee Pines Institute, as well as director of the Health Ministries Department of the Gulf States Conference. Currently, he is the founder and president of New Paradigm Ministries, a counseling health ministry which focuses on restoring life, living free, improving relationships, finding purpose, experiencing health to people in bondage. He is the father of 6 wonderful children, the husband of 1 amazing wife, and the adopted son of the God of love. So, Dr. Sandoval will take over for the time.
All right, it is my habit to pray before I speak, so I'm going to pray. Dear Heavenly Father, I'd ask for you to draw us close to you, help us to understand what we need to understand at this time, and to see the powerful effects of the mind upon the body, and how you have created us to function. And open our eyes to that, and may we see the wonder of your creation, and hence the wonder of you and who you are. And this we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. So we're going to be looking at this topic, the mind-body connection. And when we consider this particular topic, one of the ways that we can think about or relate to how the mind controls the body and the effects that it has is what we call the acute stress response. Imagine with me that you're going for a walk. It's a very early morning walk. The sun has not come up yet. You can see a little bit of the details around. And while you are walking, you notice that there is some running in the leaves under the trees beside you, and it's coming closer, and then as it does, it starts with a very menacing type of bark, and as you look, you can see some teeth coming at you, and a bit of slobber, and a very big dog is coming in your direction, and it is intent on you. What's going to happen when you are in that situation? Okay, so there's going to be certain things that happen. First of all, if this is not your dog and you are not familiar with it and you think you have this thought that it might be a threat to you, then your heart rate is going to increase, as is your blood pressure. Your blood sugar levels are going to increase as well, and your blood lipids, fats, are going to increase in the bloodstream as well. And your blood clotting factors are going to increase. All of this in just a matter of seconds. Your pupils will dilate. That doesn't take seconds. And your muscle tension is going to increase. Your blood flow to your muscles and your brain is increasing, while blood flow to your skin decreases, and bladder tension is going to decrease, and digestion is essentially going to stop. All of these are responses that happen in just a matter of milliseconds to a few seconds in response to a situation like this, where you are being confronted with something quite large. We were just reading, we're in the process of reading one of the Sam Campbell books to our son on this trip, and it was about Sam Campbell picking blackberries in a nice big blackberry patch, and he was reaching up for some high, very big, juicy blackberries, and as he pulled that branch down, there was a black bear that he was staring in the face. And so you can imagine the type of response you might have in a time like that. Well, with an acute stress response, it begins by a thought, and the thought is always a fear thought. When you have the acute stress response, there's some kind of thought of fear. Then, in response to that, your sympathetic nervous system, which many of us understand it as the fight or flight system, the sympathetic nervous system is going to be stimulated through the hypothalamus, the brainstem, then down through your sympathetic chain ganglia, and then there to the different organs, the adrenal glands, and so on. You're going to release epinephrine, norepinephrine, and other stress hormones, and that is going to circulate through your system very quickly, and it's going to alter your physiology. So most everything in the body you can alter by a single thought, and it only takes milliseconds. The stress response just shows us how powerful of an effect that the mind has on the rest of the body. Now, the mind has an effect on the body in regards to homeostasis. Now, homeostasis, you see that little picture there, it's almost like a teeter-totter. Homeostasis is essentially what your air conditioning unit or your heater unit does at home. If your temperature starts getting too high, then the air conditioner kicks in, and then it brings the temperature back down. If the temperature goes down too low, the heater kicks in, and then it brings the temperature back up so that it remains within a certain range. Now, I've only been in one home that I can recall that had a dual system where it kept the temperature between a certain range. And so if it got too high, it brought it down, and if it got too low, it brought it back up automatically. You didn't have to set heat and set air. It had both all together. Well, that's kind of like what happens in the body. And homeostasis is a state of steady internal conditions maintained by living things, and that includes things like your blood pressure, your pH balance of your bloodstream or urine or other fluid compartments, your electrolyte concentrations, how much sodium, how much potassium, how much chloride, and so on, different blood gases, how much fluid you have in your blood vessels, what hormones are you secreting and at what level, your body temperature. All of these are homeostatic. These are homeostatically controlled, so the mind is controlling all of these different things in order to keep them within a normal functional level. And it's your autonomic nervous system, which your sympathetic, your fight or flight, is part of the autonomic. The other part of it is your parasympathetic, which is your rest and digest system. So you have your fight or flight system and you have your rest and digest system. And both of those together are your autonomic nervous system, and some people call the autonomic nervous system your automatic nervous system. This is the stuff that you don't have to consciously think about. It functions. And the main controller of your autonomic nervous system is going to be your hypothalamus in the bottom forward portion of the brain, and then in your brainstem, at least as far as we understand. Now, how powerful is this? And, well, in response to thought, anybody here heard of neuroplasticity? Okay, neuro, meaning your neurons, plasticity, meaning can be molded or changed shape and so on. Neuroplasticity is the idea that the nerves and the neurons can be remodeled, can be reshaped, can be put into different patterns, different connections under the influence of certain things, certain environmental influences and so on. Now, science looks at it from an interesting perspective because science is materialistic, and so science believes that everything comes from something that's physical. Well, actually, they believe that nothing blew up, and when nothing blew up, something came. And unlike any other explosion, it came together instead of flew apart. And then from that physical that came from nothing that exploded, then everything comes from that physical component of it. And so science looks at neuroplasticity and says, okay, well, the brain can remodel itself. No, no, no. It can't. It's not possible. It's just, it cannot. Matter does not regulate itself. Matter does not organize itself. It can be organized, it can be regulated, but it doesn't do its own organizing, it doesn't do its own regulating. Something has to take the matter and then organize it. It has to take the matter and regulate it. And so we do a lot of organizing and so on via thought. So let me ask the question. I don't remember if I asked it yesterday or not. How much of what is around you is the result of thought? Okay, everything and most. So is it everything? Is it most? Is it some things? Is it nothing? Oh, depends on who you're including in the thought. All right, that's good. That's a good clarification. Let's include everything and everyone that can think. Okay, so there's a statement that says, by thinking, God can make Satan stand fast. Okay, yes. So how did the lights here, that came from? Now, I'm not talking about the light coming from it. I'm talking about the lights, like the fixture and the light bulbs and that kind of stuff. Somebody thought about it before it came about, right? What about the bench or the pew that you're sitting on? Yeah, the floor that you're on? What about the material that it was made of? All right? So it came from whose thought? God's thought. Right? So the material that everything is made of came from God's thought, and then man thought about how to rearrange that matter into light fixtures and ceiling and fans and, carpet and benches and other things like that. So everything is a result of thought. Everything. There's nothing excluded from that. Now, is thought physical or is thought spiritual? It's spiritual. Right? There's nothing that you can do to measure a thought. You can measure the effects of a thought, because the effects of a thought are the electrical activity in the neurons, and then that effect in the body, and so on. But nobody can ever measure altruism. Nobody can ever measure truth. Nobody can measure the actual thought itself, but you can measure the physical effects that come from the thought. And one of the physical effects of thought is thought can change the structure of the brain. That's what neuroplasticity is. It's thought that changes the structure of the brain itself, right? So neurons can exhibit what's called short-term synaptic plasticity. That means that you can upregulate or downregulate neurotransmitter release. So how much neurotransmitter is released at any given time. That can be changed. Also, neurons have long-term synaptic plasticity. So a cell, and for one cell to communicate with another cell, most cells are not directly connected to each other. There's some exceptions to that, like in cardiac tissue, cardiac heart muscle. But many cells, in order to communicate from one cell to the next, one cell has to release chemicals, and the other cell has to be able to capture those chemicals, and then when it captures those chemicals, then it can change how it functions based upon receiving that signal. So you can, on short term, either increase or decrease the amount of chemicals that the neuron releases, and more on the long term, you can change how many receptors there are for those chemicals on the different neurons so that it changes how they respond, so that they might be more sensitive or might be less sensitive to the signals that are being sent. And so it's quite interesting to think that thought actually changes the structure of the brain. But it does. Thought changes the structure of the brain. And what if we have negative thoughts? Is that going to affect the brain too? Oh yeah, sure. It's going to affect a lot of things, in fact. When individuals have negative thoughts, and all of this, the little citations on the bottom are the research articles where this is coming from. So neurotransmitters, negative thoughts lead to the release of certain neurotransmitters, which affect neurochemical pathways that then influence gene expression. Many people now, it's been around for a long time, have heard of epigenetics, right? And epigenetics are those influences that cause the genes, which are there in, we might say it's in the hard disk, to be written or not written, to be read or not read, to turn on or turn off the expression of the genes that are there. And the epigenome is part of that structure and the mechanism whereby those genes are turned on and turned off. And we are told in the research literature that from physical components, nutrition is number one on changing switches on the genome. Exercise is number two. But you know what number one is in reality? Thought. Yes. The quickest way, the most effective way that you can change gene expression is by thinking. It's by how you think. Right? Your thoughts control gene expression. Right? Not only the structure and function of the brain itself, but also the expression of genes and how those genes are expressed. Now, most people have heard of the placebo effect, and the placebo effect is a positive expectation regarding some treatment that causes it to have a more positive effect than it otherwise would have. So this just means you're going to receive some kind of pill, some kind of procedure, some kind of something, and you're thinking, oh, this is going to work. And guess what? It works because you think it's going to work, right? And this accounts for, if you look at research, this accounts for somewhere around 25 to 35% of all of the effect of any kind of treatment modality. If you think it's going to work, then about 25 to 35% of the time, just thinking it's going to work, it's going to work. Which makes it really important when we then look at various different treatment modalities, because every treatment modality has success stories, right? People are doing Reiki, and they're holding their hands over people and trying, thinking that they're manipulating cosmic energy and cosmic flow through an individual's body, and so on. It's one of these Eastern mysticism, from Eastern mysticism and so on, but it's the idea of manipulating cosmic energy flow through a body in order to then restore proper function that's in that body. And there's individuals that undergo these procedures and they have success. Well, yes, 25 to 35% of the time, if you think it's going to work, well, it's going to work. So we can't look at the outcome of a particular treatment modality and the fact that it has success stories associated with it and say, okay, well, it must really be the real deal because it actually has, positive effects associated with it. No, we can't look at it from that standpoint. In fact, we need to look at it from the standpoint that God has given to us certain modalities, and we need to be faithful as far as those modalities are concerned and watch out for the other ones that are not in accordance with His will and His way. But anyways, placebo effect does not just come when it is medications or procedures. Placebo effect can have a larger, broader audience to it or results. So in this particular study, this is the exercise and the placebo effect, what they did is they took individuals, 84 female room attendants who were working at 7 different hotels, and half of the participants in the study were instructed that their work-related physical activity, what they were doing on the job, met the Surgeon General's requirement for physical activity, adequate physical activity, while the other group, which was they called the control group, were given no such instruction. They were simply told what the recommendations were, the Surgeon General's recommendations were for physical activity, but they were not told that their activity on the job met the requirements. So that's the difference. You have one group, they're told, okay, what you do on the job meets the Surgeon General's requirements for physical activity. The other group, they're just told what the requirements are. And then they followed them up for 4 weeks. And they also, had surveys beforehand about what their normal activities were during the week and so on outside of work. And they did those surveys again afterwards. And what they found was that those that were told that their physical activity met the Surgeon General's requirements, they had more weight loss, they had lower blood pressure, they had less body fat, they had a better waist to hip ratio, and their body mass index all decreased over that 4-week time period without any measurable change in physical activity. Simply because they thought that what they were doing on the job was better. Right? So it was a placebo effect. They're like, okay, well, I'm getting my physical activity while I'm at work. And so they have the positive thought that they're getting their physical activity while they're at work. And just by having that positive that thought while they're on the activity at work, they start losing more weight. They start burning more fat. And, it's amazing. Now, you take some college students that are interested in fitness, and what they did is they gave them quadriceps exercises. This is where you're on the bench like that, and you're lifting the weight, and you're straightening out your legs. They're bent, and you lift against a weight in order to straighten them out, and then back down, and then straighten them out and back down, and straighten them out and back down. So what they did is they did their exercises before receiving a particular drink. And then they gave them this drink, which they were told was high-dose caffeine. And then, after another half an hour, they put them back to do the same exercises again. And what they found is that after taking that drink, the amount of muscle work that they could do increased, but they still felt as fatigued when they were done with the exercise than they did before they had the drink. So they changed the protocol, and now what they did is they did the same thing. They had them do the exercise until fatigued, till they couldn't lift the weight anymore. Then they gave them a break. They gave them this high caffeine drink, which actually was a placebo, didn't have any caffeine at all in it. And then after a half an hour, they put them back to do the exercise again. But unbeknownst to the participants, they decreased the amount of weight. So it looked like they were lifting the same amount of weight, but it actually was less afterwards. And of course, what would you imagine? If it actually had less weight, they'd be able to lift it more times, right? And it wouldn't be as difficult as it was before. So they were still able to do more muscle work, and even more so than they did in the first experiment, but they perceived that their fatigue was less. Because, they didn't know it, but they were lifting less weight than what they were before. They did it more times, but they were lifting not as heavy each time. And so after doing this several times, what they did is they left the weight the same afterwards. So they trained them about 2 or 3 times of doing this thing, and then afterwards, when they lifted the same weight, it wasn't changed now this time. It was the same weight that they had before. They still perceived that they could do more, and they had less fatigue. So you just train them to think that they're going to feel less fatigued afterwards, and then you give them more work, and they still feel less fatigued and do more work. It's amazing. Now, what about allergies? Anybody like allergies? Yeah, we might, after this study, we might say, well, hang on, how much of it is in my head? All right, so what they did is they took 30 patients that had allergic dust mite rhinitis, house dust mite rhinitis. So they're allergic to house dust mites. And what they did is they gave them this funny tasting liquid. Anybody ever had Robitussin? Yeah. If you have ever had Robitussin, you know you had Robitussin. Because it just has that, yes, you just, as a kid, I had to push through it, and I was a little better at it when I got older, but it's just, it has its taste. Well, they put together a drink that was kind of like that. It had that taste to it, so you knew you were taking something, right? But it was actually a placebo other than whatever they had to flavor it with. So they're given this novel tasting liquid and also an antihistamine. So they're given both together. They're taking the antihistamine pill and they're drinking it with this novel tasting liquid, and they do this for 5 days, every day in a row. And then they had a 9-day washout period where for 9 days, no medication, no nothing, go back to your normal life, but don't take any meds for allergies. And then they brought them back, and for 10 of them, they put them on taking water and a placebo pill. So they're taking the placebo pill and they're chugging it with water. 11 of them, they gave them a placebo pill with this novel taste liquid. So they're chugging it with the novel liquid. And 9 of them, they took water and an antihistamine pill. And what they're doing is they're now going to test and they're going to compare what their allergy testing is like compared to when they took the antihistamine. Now they're going to compare it to these 3 different groups. Right? How did they respond? And what they showed is that, of course, when everybody was taking the antihistamine, everybody had a decrease in their allergy symptoms. Everybody, when they did skin prick testing for histamine, the effect of that decreased. And what's called ex vivo basophilic activation, that means that they take some of your white blood cells, they find the basophils, which are the ones that actually produce histamine, and they test them outside of the body to see how active it is. And if the medication is working, it's going to decrease the activity of those basophils, not produce so much histamine. So that's what we would expect with an antihistamine medication. All right, so that's all right. So that says, okay, well, the antihistamine does something, and it does something in the direction that it's supposed to do something. But when the group that later, after 9 days later, they took the placebo pill with water, well, their symptoms were also decreased, just like the antihistamine group, and their skin prick test was just like the antihistamine group, but there was no effect on the basophil activation. But when they took the novel tasting liquid, the group that had the novel tasting liquid and the placebo, they had exactly the same effect as the group taking antihistamines. Every test that they did to check for the activity of it was just the same, even though they were taking a placebo, because now they have this funky tasting liquid and they're going, okay, I'm getting it. Right? So they have that positive attempt, that I'm getting this and it's actually going to work. And it worked just as well as taking an antihistamine. So interesting stuff. Now, not only is there the placebo effect, there's the nocebo effect. And the nocebo effect is where you expect this to be harmful, and it's more harmful just because you expect it to be harmful. It's the opposite, right? So if you go in with a negative attitude into your surgery or your procedure or your whatever, and you're like, oh, I don't think this is going to work. Well, guess what? Yeah, just that thought, just that idea can push things in the direction of it not working. So the mindset around any procedure or anything like that is really important. And the nocebo effect is out there. We look at it from a research standpoint. One study says that about 5 to 79% of trials, that's a pretty wide range, exhibit the nocebo effect. I guess it depends on how you define that. In one particular trial, 8.8% of the Parkinson's patients who were taking the sugar pill dropped out of the study because they had too many side effects associated with the medication. But they are actually on the sugar pill. See, so they thought they were on the medication. They thought they were getting side effects associated with the medication. They were only on the sugar pill, and they dropped out of the study because the effects were so bad. Okay? And on a depression study, 4.5% of individual, 44.7% of depressed patients experienced nocebo effects. They were taking the sugar pill, and 44.7% of them experienced negative effects associated with the sugar pill, and 4.5% of them discontinued entirely because the effects were so bad. Okay. All right, so what we think is really powerful. We know that chronic stress is associated with heart disease, asthma, obesity, diabetes, headaches, gastrointestinal problems, Alzheimer's disease, premature death. All of those are fairly clear in the literature. And we now know that if an individual has chronic stress, that what it does is, like in diabetes, what happens in diabetes is if you have, your sugar levels are too high and, you have too much fats and you have fatty infiltration of the pancreas and the liver and other parts of the body, and you have an inflammatory process that's there, then you start developing insulin resistance because your insulin receptors on the cells start getting gummed up or start not being so many of them there. So you need more and more insulin to get to your cells so that you can get the sugar from the bloodstream into the cells so that the cells can use the sugar to operate by for fuel. Well, a similar thing happens in the body when you have chronic stress, and now you have stress hormones that are in the body, and the stress hormones are constantly hitting the cells. The cells downregulate how many receptors that they have on the surface for those stress hormones. And so it leads to steroid receptor resistance. That means that you end up then with poor control of inflammation, and you end up with increased inflammation going throughout the body. And well, guess how many conditions are associated with inflammation? Yeah, all of them, right? I just have a small representative list of conditions that we know or that are associated with inflammation. So stress is going to affect all of this. Anybody, and nobody, I don't think anybody questions anymore whether stress affects your health or not. I mean, pretty much the messages have been out there long enough. Everybody knows stress is not good for your health. But what if your stress is in the form of hostility? Right. So, yeah, like Dr. Obama. Yes. So this was a University of North Carolina study, and what they did is they took one of the classes of graduating medical students, and they happened to have a class of 255 medical students, and they gave them the Cook-Medley Hostility Scale test. And so they tested them on hostility, and they separated the class into the least hostile half of the class and the most hostile half of the class. And then they followed them up for 25 years, and 25 years later, the half of the class that was the most hostile were 5 times more likely to develop heart disease and 6 times more likely to die by the age of 50, because the average age of the class was 25 at graduation. So, it's 25-year follow-up there, the average age is 50. So that's a huge effect. Right? It's a huge effect. Now, I'm glad I have a lawyer in the group. They did the same thing with the law students. Right? They had fewer of them. They don't survive as much. So 118 of that class. And they did the same thing. They gave them the Cook-Medley Hostility Scale, and they took the least hostile half of the class versus the most hostile half of the class. And after 25 years follow-up, 4% of the least hostile half of the class were dead at the age of 50, and 20% of the most hostile half of the class were dead by the age of 50. And just for the clarification's sake, I'll let you guess which class had the higher average Cook-Medley hostility scores. The lawyers. Yes. Yes. It's true. When you teach people to argue, well, they'll probably never watch this, so I might be able to say it, but it might come back and bite me at some time. But certain children have certain propensities to be a bit more argumentative, and there might be certain children that you direct in a certain direction and say, oh, well, take that argumentative and do something with it. And then send them off to law school because you wouldn't do well doing education or special ed or other things of that nature, because that attitude is not going to go very well there. So there might be some pre-selection bias from that standpoint. Loneliness also affects health. And we're told that loneliness not only alters behavior, but is related to greater resistance to blood flow in your cardiovascular system. And guess what happens when you have more resistance to the blood flow going through your blood vessels? You have to increase the pressure in order to keep it going. So loneliness is very much of a cause of high blood pressure. It has higher rises in morning levels of stress hormone cortisol, altered gene expression in immune cells, poorer immune function, higher blood pressure, and increased levels of depression. So all of those are associated with loneliness. All right, so those are all depressing topics. Let's look at forgiveness. All right. Forgiveness, how do you think that's going to turn out? Yeah, it's going to be on the good side of things, we would think, right? So there was a meta-analysis. It put 103 studies together looking at forgiveness and its effect on health. A total of 26,043 individuals that were studied in those studies, and what they found was that there was a strong association between forgiveness and psychological health and cardiovascular health indicators. So those indicators that would say, okay, you have better heart health was true for those that were forgiving as opposed to those who were still holding on to their bitterness. Now, all of us are sitting in a church, and since you are, you're going to live longer. This was the Harvard nurses study, and what they were looking at, the Harvard nurses health study, they were looking at 74,534 nurses that had graduated through Harvard, and they followed them up between 1996 and 2012. During that time, 13,537 of those nurses passed away during that time frame. And they looked at that and they said, okay, well, what was their age, what were their health factors, what were other things like that? But also they looked at it and they said, okay, well, what about religious attendance? And how did that affect overall mortality for individuals in the study? And what they found is that compared to those who never went and participated in religious studies, which was 17,872 of those individuals, those that went less than once a week, so this is your Easter, Christmas, confirmation, whatever, you go rarely to church, those had a 13% less likelihood of dying during the study period. So it decreased their mortality by 13% over that time period. Now, that doesn't mean that 13% of that group is never going to die, right? Or just in that time frame, they were 13% less likely to die. Now, that compared to an individual who went once a week, which was 30,000 of those, that decreased your risk of dying during the study period by 26%. And if you went more than once a week, so you were one of those, you went to church and then you went to prayer meeting and so on, it decreased your risk of dying by 33%. So very direct correlations between the participation in religious services, interest in religious services, and longevity of individuals as well. And that has to do with your, thought processes as well. It can have social aspects associated with it too, but it's thought-related, mind-related. Here's a fun study that was done. They took 24 females between the ages of 57 and 60, and they were coming in for their flu shot for the year. And they randomly separated them into two groups of 12. And one group, before they gave them their flu shot, they sat them down in a group and they said, okay, we want you to think about the worst thing that has ever happened to you in your life. Death of a loved one, divorce, whatever it might be. And And 6 minutes later, they gave them their flu shot. The other group, they had them sit down separately, and they said, all right, we want you to think about the best thing that ever happened to you in your life. 6 minutes later, they gave them their flu shot. Now, all of them, they took a blood sample beforehand, and taking the blood sample beforehand, they realized that what they did is they were looking for antibody levels against the particular flu strain that the flu shot contained, to see if they had any preformed antibodies, how much it was, what the difference was after they received the flu shot. And then they took samples at 1 month, 2 months, 6 months, and a year afterwards. And what they found was all the way up to 6 months, the individuals that had 6 minutes of positive thinking had higher antibody levels to the flu vaccine than those who had the 6 minutes of negative thinking. So it tells us that even short periods of positive or negative thinking can have an effect for months on immune system function and susceptibility to infections and other things. So attitude is very important. Here was a study of 193 adults between the ages of 21 to 55. They evaluated them for positive emotional style, whether they're happy, lively, and calm. That's the descriptions. And then they controlled for negative emotional style, cognitive and social dispositions, and self-reported health. And what they found is, I don't know who signs up for these things except you pay them. They took drops of rhinovirus and influenza virus, and they took it and they just put it directly into their nostrils. So direct inoculation. And then they quarantined them, each individual in a separate room, quarantined without any human exposure or interaction for a period of, I think, a week or 10 days or something like that. And then they observed them to see if they got sick. And what they found is that those that had a greater positive emotional style were less likely to develop any infection associated with it by about 3 times. 3 times less likely if you had a positive emotional style as opposed to somebody that had a negative emotional style. So susceptibility has a lot to do with attitude. Now, what kind of attitude did we as humanity enter into this last pandemic? Yeah, negative. It was fear, there was hostility, there was, all of this kind of stuff. And then there's all the fear-mongering, and there was all of the reporting, and, the numbers and all of these different things. And so of course, it created a big social experiment of negative thinking. And what happens when you have a large social experiment of negative thinking? Negative results. Right, you're going to have negative results. Guess what disappeared the first year the pandemic came out? It dropped off the map entirely. Flu. Yeah, it was cured that year, right? Because everybody was quarantining. So it was cured that year. And so, they said, well, it was, okay. So it's very interesting. So you can create a social experiment of fear and so on, and you can affect immune system function associated with that, and and it has its effect. So here's a study with rats, or actually mice. What they were doing, the researchers in this particular study, they were testing a medication to see if they could use it for the next Tylenol or ibuprofen. It was an anti-inflammatory pain medication that they were testing to see if it would be effective. And one of the ways that you have to test, at least you used to, I'm not sure about now, everything changed, but you used to have to do a whole sorts of animal testing with these products beforehand to make sure that they're not going to be harmful or detrimental in the long term for individuals that take them. And so one of the tests that you needed to do was what's called an intrathecal injection. So you get the substance that you're studying and you inject it in the fluid space around the brain of the animal, so that you can assure that it gets across the blood-brain barrier and then see what happens to the animal neurologically. So that if you have a human that takes this and it gets across the blood-brain barrier, what is it going to potentially do to the humans if they take it, right? This is part of the studying and testing to make sure if this is something that we can actually approve and put on the market. So they were doing this test, and an interesting thing happened when they injected this substance in the brain space around the mice. The mice stopped producing tumor necrosis factor alpha. And tumor necrosis factor alpha is a prominent inflammatory molecule in the immune cascade, and it's associated with a number of different inflammatory processes. But tumor necrosis factor alpha is not made in the brain. It's made elsewhere in the body by the immune system. And when they checked, there was none of the chemical in the bloodstream. It was only around the brain space. But in the body, it turned off tumor necrosis factor alpha, but the substance wasn't actually getting to the body where tumor necrosis factor alpha is produced. And so they're kind of scratching their heads and saying, okay, well, what's going on? What's going on here? And so they started investigating, and it took them about 5 years. And what they found out was when they injected this substance around the brain space, it changed the signal that was being sent by the brain down the vagus nerve to the spleen. In the spleen, the signal was being received by the T helper cells, part of the immune system. The T helper cells communicated with the natural killer cells, and the natural killer cells are the predominant producers of tumor necrosis factor alpha, and the natural killer cells shut off their production of tumor necrosis factor alpha. So the researchers looked at it and they said, well, if the signal's coming from the brain and it's going there and it's causing this response, I wonder if we can do it without the chemical. I wonder if we can identify the nerve fibers that are going to the spleen in that area and electronically control the signal that's going down to that area and turn off the production of tumor necrosis factor alpha. And they did exactly that. They did that. Right? So they were able to alter immune system function by simply changing signals sent by nerves to certain parts of the body. Now, how do you and I control immune function? Yeah, your immune system is controlled by your mind. It is. And it's controlled through the nerves, and the nerves can communicate with the white blood cells and so on, and send the signals and whatever. So your mind has a tremendous impact upon immune function because it's the controller of immune system function. If you have an individual, this is a whole other presentation, but if you have an individual that has an autoimmune disease or has a bone marrow condition, whether that's cancer or some other issue, well, where does the immune system get birthed? In the bone marrow, right? That's where it's born, right? That's where it's birthed. And if anybody's done blood work in a hospital, you know that red blood cells sometimes are up, sometimes they're a little bit more down, and it tends to fluctuate. Same thing happens with platelets, same thing happens with white blood cells and the different types of white blood cells, and they're always fluctuating. They're always responding to something. Who is it that's controlling their production and their fluctuation? It's the mind, right? If you've ever broken a bone, you know it hurts. It hurts. I've broken enough in my life. I know it hurts. And I've been there where they said it too. That hurts too. You got lots of nerves in your bone. And it communicates with those cells that are developing, and it determines how much are going to be produced and how fast and how often and so on. Your nervous system is the one that's controlling all of that. So if you want to know what is the cause of the autoimmune disease or the bone marrow condition or whatever, go to the Bible. Go to, that's part of it. You go to Psalms, go to Proverbs, and go to Isaiah. Those are going to be your most productive areas. And you look for everything that talks about bone, bones, or marrow. Right? Everything that talks about bone, bones, or marrow. If it is talking about bones being intact, bones being fat, bones being strong, or the marrow being fat, then that's going to tell you your solution to the problem. Read in the context around there what that is in context, and you're going to find the factors that are the solution to the problem. And if you go to it and you see broken bones or thin bones or dry marrow, and you read in the context around there, you're going to find the cause. Right? You're going to find the cause. The Bible is a human textbook of physiology as well. We just haven't learned how to read it. Right? It's quite interesting. So yes, we're told a merry heart is good like a medicine, but a broken spirit dries up the bones. So it's very true. Wisdom from thousands of years ago, still true today, right? And research is very much showing it. So attitude is important. It is very important when it comes to health. For the sake of time, I'm going to skip that, but we will do cancer. Psychosocial stress and cancer. Do you think stress is going to help cancer or not? No, it's not. So the more stress you have, the more likely you're going to develop cancer in the first place. The more stress you have when you have cancer, the more likely you're going to die from the cancer, and the shorter that it's going to take. That's what the research shows. It's clear from that standpoint. Simply having cancer, for most people, is stressful, right? Just receiving the diagnosis, it's stressful because most people think of it in terms of, death sentence. No. Are you alive? Yes. Is God alive? Yes. Is there hope? Yes. All right. Let me get off on a little side tangent just for a second. Don't ever believe statistics. If your doctor tells you that you've got a 98% chance of dying from this particular cancer or whatever, don't believe them. Statistics can never predict what will happen. Statistics are only describing what has happened in a certain population that has been studied under certain conditions. But it can never predict what your outcome is going to be, ever. But when the doctor says, you got a 98% chance of dying from this condition, what do? You think, I'm going to die. Right? I'm going to die. And what's going to happen when you think, I'm going to die? Yeah, the nocebo effect. Right? So don't ever believe statistics. You have a God. He's a living God. You are his child. He cares for you. He knows all about you. He is interested in you. And your death is not his wish. Right? He came to die so that you could live. Your life is his wish. Right? Take that. Right? Believe it. Run with it. Cooperate with him in the process. Now, when it comes to cancer, it's quite interesting. If you take the nerve that goes to the center of a tumor and you cut the nerve, the tumor changes how it behaves. Yeah. So isn't that interesting? So what does that tell us about the nerve in relation to the cancer? Yeah. It's controlling the cancer's behavior. Right? I can't tell you how many patients I've taken care of now that I have time to actually sit down, ask the questions, and get the answers and review their life and their life history, where an individual developed their cancer after some major loss in their life. Right? They lost a loved one, they lost a job, they lost a capacity or something, right? It was a major loss to them, and now a year or several years later, now they're developing cancer. I can't tell you how many health ministries directors that I have taken care of, or health ministries leaders of churches, and they have been vegan for the last 20 years, and they exercise every day, and they're doing this right, and they're doing that right, and they're doing the other thing right. And they've had the praise the Lord, hallelujah story for a long time, and now they got cancer. And then they come to see me, and they're all in tears, and they're just distraught, and they're like, I don't understand how this can be the case. I have lived well, I have followed the health message, I have this, that, or the other thing, and now I have cancer. This can't be happening to me. And since I've been advocating health for everybody, and I've been advocating do all of these things, and if you do all of these things, you're not going to get sick, and now I'm sick, now it's going to be, going against the whole health message and everything, and I'm such a failure, and I don't know why. Well, if you have enough time to ask the questions and to get deeper into the life of the individual, you'll find out that it's a lot easier to do health behaviors than it is to think well. Right? It's a lot easier to do health behaviors than it is to think well. And there are lies that they believe that are true. Right? They believe that the lies are true. And that's true of us in our sinful, fallen human nature. And when you believe that a lie is true, you're going to operate according to the lie that you believe is true. And if you operate according to the lie that you believe is true, your mind was only created to control your body well under the influence of truth, not error. Truth is information that puts things in the correct order so that it functions. Error is information that puts things in the wrong order, and now it dysfunctions. So if error is the foundation of what the mind is thinking, then the mind is going to erroneously control the functions of the body, and things are going to happen. Right? But nobody believes error thinking that they're believing error. Everybody believes error thinking that they're believing truth. So it's not whether somebody thinks what they believe is error, it's whether what they believe really is error, even though they think it's truth. So that's the issue, right? And so that can be hidden to us. It can be, and oftentimes it is. And sometimes the only way that God can reveal it to us is to allow the inevitable, to allow what's going to come. And now when we have the physical effects associated with the mental issue that's going on, now we have a motivation to go look for the cause. And we're told that 9/10 of diseases have their foundation where? In the mind, right? And I would say that 9/10, now how much of what you see around you comes from thought? Everything. What happens in you as a result of thought? How much of it? All of it. All of it. The 9/10 is that 9/10 of the time, it's a direct effect of your thought directly on the body. And the other 10% is through what you eat, what you drink, things you're exposed to, what you inherited from parents, trauma that you are, you suffer, and so on and so forth. That's the other 10%. But the 90% is directly from what you think, and and the mind's impact upon the body through the nervous system, and its altered control of that nervous system. Of the functions of the body. So we know from research that the nervous system is involved in metastasis in every step along the way. Every step along the way. So the nervous system helps in the initial initiation and clonal expansion of abnormal cells, meaning that they change. Remember, what's the thing that most quickly and most ably changes gene expression? Thought. Right? Thought. And that mediated through the nervous system to different areas. So the initiation of that transformation that happens in response to thought, then its assistance in clonal expansion, so the cells start growing in their local area. The ability for the cells to break free from its basement membrane and still live. The nervous system helps out with that process as well, because they should die when they break free from their basement membrane. Epithelial mesenchymal transition, that means that the cell looks very much like what it should, and it stays put, and it stays hooked to the other cells around it, and so it starts breaking those hooks to those cells around it and changes more of its shape, and now it's something that can kind of start moving and getting through some of the tissues. Well, the nervous system helps with that. And the nervous system helps with extravasation and colonialization. So getting out into the blood vessels and then being able to transmit and get into another location. Right? Angiogenesis, the growth of blood vessels to the tumor in order to support its growth. That's influenced by the nervous system. The ability of the cancer to evade the immune response, that's assisted by the immune system. And the tumor microenvironment that allows it to grow in the area where it is, that's the response of the nervous system. All right? All of it in relation to the nervous system. So Michelle came to me a number of years ago. She had ovarian cancer, stage 3C, and she had 11 tumors in her abdominal cavity, plus the primary tumor on the ovary. She did have a hysterectomy with oophorectomy, and that's when they discovered the ovarian cancer. And so they suggested that she do chemo. She did. More tumors, bigger after the first round of chemo. She did a second round of chemo. Same result. It was just getting bigger and not any better. Her CA-125 levels, which is the blood marker for this type of cancer, was high. And she was, her joints were hurting her. She used to be an athlete. She couldn't run. In fact, it was difficult for her to walk when she came. At the time, I was at Uchee Pines, and I was her physician. And so I counseled with her for, relationship issues and so on. Found out that she had high bitterness against her mother for how her mother had treated her in the past. She never knew who her father was, and she had a few difficult relationships going on in life from there. We, of course, put her on a plant-based diet, did hydrotherapy, poultices, exercise, sunshine, herbal teas, and that's the kind of the usual deal at Uchee. And after that 17-day session, well, her CA-125 levels were down into the normal range, and her joints felt much better. They didn't hurt. She was doing a little bit of running right now, and things were going better. Now, let me tell you that during this process, I challenged her that she needed to have God, not her mother, as her source. And that the reason that she was bitter with her mother is because she was doing the I am God thing, right? So thinking that she's her own and that what her mother is doing to her, and so it's personal, so therefore it's her problem, and now it's a problem that she has to fix, but she can't fix her mother and make her mother be any better or do any better, and so now she's stuck in a situation that she can't get out of. And, and she can't get rid of the bitterness and so on. So I challenged her to come to God and to take from Him as her source so that she could have love to love her mother with, so she could let her mother go, she could forgive her, and she could serve as that channel of taking and giving, including her mother, regardless of what her mother's like. And of course, she was desperate, so she started doing this. And, well, by the time the session was over, again, cancer markers were looking good. 2 months later, repeat imaging, only 5 tumors remain, and the 5 that remain are smaller than the ones that were, that they were originally. So obviously we got to the cause is being reversed, and the condition is going away. 2 months after that, I get a call, boo-hoo-hoo, CA-125 levels are elevated again. Okay, what's going on? Mom came back in the picture. And all of the emotion, all the thoughts and everything stirred up again. She forgot almost everything that I told her. So we went back over again, counseled with her again. No, you need God as your source, not your mother. You need a love from God that can love her despite what she's like and let her be however she is. And she took that advice and she went with it, and her next CA-125 levels were back down. I don't have time. I'm just going to summarize. Ramon, he had ulcerative colitis, and after reading the Law of Life book, which is, I wrote that. Anyways, after reading that several times, he realized that he had a conflict with a coworker that he needed to resolve. He had tried meds, he had tried lifestyle, he had tried everything, and once he resolved that issue with his coworker, ulcerative colitis went away, and he's ulcerative colitis free now. And Veronica, it was eczema, and when she found out the issue that, she was having family issues and whatever, when she resolved those, her eczema went away. A merry heart doeth good like a medicine, but a broken spirit drieth the bones. The effect of the mind on the body is powerful. So in conclusion, the mind has a strong controlling, regulating connection with the body. Positive thinking can lead to proper physiology. Positive thinking is not just happy whatever, it's according to the truth. And I want to clarify that. Positive thinking is according to the truth. It's not just having positive thoughts, but it's according to the truth. And the negative thinking can lead to pathophysiology. Most patient complaints are secondary to mind issues, and to practice medicine and ignore this aspect of humanity is at least regrettable, if not malpractice. Let me pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for your blessings. Thank you for this mind. Thank you for this body. Thank you for how you've created us. And Lord, help us to become intelligent in regard to this powerful thing you have created us with, that we might use it well and that we might use it according to your will and way. And may we come in contact with your mind, that we might take the mind of Christ. And this I pray in Jesus' name. Amen.